the heart of really what we come to do well is understand our clients.
Understanding what the needs of the family are.
Help them make some decisions.
Preparing the next generation for what's to come.
Being on a first-name basis, getting to know their stories.
Working through their questions, their concerns, and figuring out the solution that's best.
They trust us enough to come in and help them solve that.
You really feel at the end of the day when you add value, there's a great sense of accomplishment and reward.
Henry David Thoreau once said, "It's not what you look at that matters, it's what you see." In managing wealth, there's an awful lot to look at. Taxes and trusts, family meetings and bonds, and everything in between. It's why we rely on those who know each of these fields so deeply that they can see where others are merely looking, who can focus on what's best for clients over generations. After all, that's what expertise is.
On a perfect day, there is no finer place in all of sports.
Nerves, excitement, and anticipation.
Then beautiful, truly stunning.
Still coming, California wrong. Steals the goal.
To the Breeders' Cup World Championship.
Master horse racing with the power of daily racing form. DRF has helped players win at the races for 125 years. Now the information you trust is better than ever. Get exclusive late-breaking news from our reporters at tracks across the country. Position yourself to win by adding buyer speed figures and the new DRF formulator to your handicapping arsenal. Go to drf.com today. Use coupon code DRF2023 to get a free formulator card and start winning.
Blood Horse Plus, available through bloodhorse.com, provides exclusive, timely, and unmatched content to subscribers, including Fox Sports, Blood Horse branded weekly programs, a detailed stakes winners section, behind-the-scenes videos from Blood Horse staff, on-demand access to deeper horse statistics, and a $5 monthly credit to equineline.com. Upgrade to Blood Horse Plus today.
Hi, my name is Gary Falter with the Jockey Club, and I'd like to welcome everyone to today's online panel. And this was supposed to be our second panel in our schedule of 10 online Zoom panels, but we actually inserted a panel a couple of weeks ago to talk about the HISA ADMC program. So if you missed that panel 2 weeks ago or any of our previous panels, you can go to ownerview.com and find all of our recorded panels from the past, and we'll have this one available later this week. And today's panel, this is a topic that owners have asked for the last 2 years when we get feedback. And we're going to talk about handicapping. So we got 4 wonderful people here, and I'll introduce them in just a minute. But before we get started, I'd really like to recognize our sponsors, starting with our presenting sponsors, Bessemer Trust, you saw their ad, Solkeen and Ogden, and the Green Group. And I'd also like to thank today's panel sponsors, the New York Thoroughbreds Horsemen's Association, the Daily Racing Forum, and the Breeders' Cup. And I'd really like to thank all the sponsors for their support for thoroughbred ownership, and their sponsorship is what helps us keep these panels at no charge to you. So special thanks to all the sponsors. Now, if you've attended any of our past online Zoom panels, you'll remember that we usually hold the Q&A to the very end of the panel. And last month, we changed things up a little bit. We're at about the 20-minute mark, or last month's panel, we did accounting and tax. We took some questions at the very beginning and the 20-minute mark. So we're going to do the same thing today. So if you have any questions for the panelists, just use the Q&A button at the bottom of your Zoom screen, and we'll take a break at a 20-minute point, answer some of your questions, and then go right back into the handicapping discussions. And try to keep your questions as short as possible so we can get to as many as we can. Okay, so now I'd like to introduce our speakers, and you'll notice at the bottom of your Zoom screen the names of all of our speakers. And so I'll start with Ellis Starr. Ellis is on my left, your left. Now he's the National Racing Analyst for Equibase. Welcome, Ellis. Glad you're here. Next is Caitlin Free. You may recognize Caitlin because she's the racing analyst and reporter for Churchill Downs, and also does the racing analyst for Turfway Park in Colonial. So welcome, Caitlin.
Thank you, Gary.
Okay, next we have Tom Leach. And if you've listened to any of the University of Kentucky basketball games, well, this gentleman is the voice of the Wildcats. And he's also the racing analyst for Keeneland. So welcome, Tom.
Thank you.
And on my right, Jim Goodman, and Jim is the Director of Wagering Development for Keeneland. Welcome, Jim.
Thank you, Gary. Glad to be here.
Okay, so Caitlin, we don't really have a moderator for this panel, but Caitlin's agreed to kind of lead the discussions, and this is going to be more conversational than anything else. And I know we've got some past performances to show on the screen and some other things. So I'm going to drop off for now, and then I'll return with the questions. So again, if you have any questions for the panelists, just use that Q&A button, and hopefully at the 20-minute mark, we'll take a little break, answer your questions, and then go back to the discussion. So Caitlin, I'm going to turn it over to you and Ellis and Jim and Tom.
All right, thank you, Gary. Well, first, I just want to welcome everybody and thank you for wanting to participate in this, and glad that there was definitely some interest. Myself, Jim, Tom, and Ellis were very excited to be having, conversation and taking everybody through topics that they wish to talk about, certainly open to questions. And I know that we have a lot of owners participating in this, and there was definitely some interest with that. So we'll kind of, be taking you through some of the handicapping angles, whether you have a horse or what your different wagering interests would be, specifically if you have a horse or if you're thinking of wagering with others, or just kind of overall the whole entire topic. But we have past performances, as Gary said, where we can go over some races that have already happened recently and kind of done some of our simulation handicapping and how we would structure bets and how we kind of lay out our handicapping type of modules, just to give some examples and give some good talking points. But where do we want to start off first?
I think we'll start off with a couple of races. Jim and I are going to do different takes on the same races, and then Caitlin and Tom will do that as well. And one of the things I think that you as owners are most interested in is how to assess a race, your horse's chances when looking at the pace of a race. And the pace of a race, everybody probably knows, is more about how you expect it to be run, the early pace scenario, the middle, the late. And I'm just going to jump into it real quick with some definitions that I use. They're a little subjective, people use in establishing the pace, and then breaking it down horse by horse, and then let Jim kick into it and add some things. It sort of goes back and forth, and then talk about, these races have been run. So we've talked about what happened, whether things worked out as we thought, whether horses surprised us, etc. But looking at this race, which is going to be the 13th race at Gulfstream Park, it's the Appleton Stakes from Saturday, April 1st. And really quick definitions are, horses are grouped in pace in terms of what they call early presser, which is a horse we might consider a stalker. They call it E or EP. The presser type, which is P, and the definition, by the way, is early is a horse on the lead. An early presser type within about a length of the lead at the first call, which is a quarter mile. A presser type would be within about 2 lengths at the first call, or within a length or 2 at the second call, which is about a half a mile for most sprints and the 3/4 mark for most 2-turn races. And then we call sustained horses that are run from towards the back. That's because they run about the same pace, and they don't really they show speed at the end because other horses are getting tired. And so presser sustained horses are within a length at about the top of the stretch. Doesn't really matter where they are early, just so you understand. And sustained is a horse that's usually 5 to 7 lengths back at the stretch. Those are horses that just come on in the stretch. So looking at this race, we'll start real quick with the number 1 horse. He's Pure Gold. And this is just going through my methodology as I look at a race like this one. Looking at races in which the horse finished first or second mostly. So that race that the horse won on January 1st. You'll notice at that first call, which is the second position in the race, where he was fourth and 4 lengths back. That's the first, that's about the quarter mile mark into the race. This horse was fourth and 4th. That's more of a pressing style. And that was the race he won. So that's the race I'm looking at. Go down to number 2 horse, looking at races that he ran well in. The horse won from 6th on February 10th. It was 6th early, 6th, 5th, 3rd, 1st, as you see. That's more of a pressure and sustain type using those races. Going down to number 3, actually finished second in his most recent race with 7th and 8th early. That's more of a sustain type. And number 4, Striker. The last race was a race in which the horse led wire to wire. Now at this point, just so you know, in my methodology, I write these letters on the page. And at this point, I'm looking to see how many horses are going to be either early or early pressure. So this horse Striker gets an E right away. Going down to the next one, real quick, number 5, Fort Washington. You can see the horse is almost last every time early. Definitely a sustained closing type. 6, Steady On, won from about 3.5 lengths back on October 22nd, was closer recently, the October 22nd, I didn't mean October 22nd, December 22nd, I'm sorry, when he was made the lead and was beating the nose, was up closer there, probably more of an early pressure type. Number 7, the 2 last wins have come leading pretty much from start to finish, definitely gets an E. Number 8, Lucky Curlin. That last race was the winning race. I don't have to look at too many winning races. He was 4th and 3rd early, so that's an early pressure type on number 8, Lucky Curlin. Also, if you look back on the same horse, the other win most recently back in September 18th was 6th. So more of a pressure type, but was an early pressure last time out. Churchtown, the last race is irrelevant. So you go back to the one before that, wire to wire. Also, there was a race at 7.5 furlongs on the grass where he came from 6th. But most of the time you could see at that first and second call, the horse is first or within a length. That's pretty much an early type horse. Roaring 40s, definitely early. And number 11, County Final. This horse is stretching out from sprints. The last 2 races were sprints. There aren't any routes in the horse's history. So in this case, I usually say a horse like this is going to be early. And number 12, Dreams of Tomorrow, was last race out, was 3rd early, so that's early pressure type. So really quick, if you listen to how I kind of looked at the race, I end up with up to 5 horses in the race that are early, and that's way too many. In 1 or 2, one can break away. 3, 4, 5, you start to get into a situation where the horses are going to be going faster than average, doing what they think they have to do. Jockeys know their strategy. They don't have much of a choice in most cases, and that's what's going to happen. So that left 5 horses in the race, and now going back to the PPs, we're looking at the ones that are left, the horses that were more of the pressing types. Now we get into the handicapping methodology. So number 1, He's Pure Gold, was a horse that certainly has that style, but this is a stakes race, and we're assuming everybody listening kind of understands. So the last time out in the Tampa Bay Stakes Grade 3, the horse was not competitive. Before that, the Presque Isle Mile, not competitive. The State Bred Stakes races you can see there on August 28th, that with the S in the square, the Hesse Stakes, those are State Bred. I think the one is overmatched. So of the closers, now I'm eliminating that horse. Number 2, Super Dormy, one before last, was perfect. If there are up to 4 or 5 horses battling, I'm assuming and looking at the race in advance, this horse is going to run well. The 3, Gray's Fable, again, more of a deeper closer, but that last race would be representative of what we think we could expect today. So that would be a contender. Number 5, Fort Washington, comes from far back, did win a non-graded stakes race last June, back on June 26th of 2022, the Tail of the Cat Stakes. So won that non-graded stakes like this one, but needs some help though. We're coming from that far back in a big field. And then the 6, Steady On, again, probably in a great position, coming from just off the pace, 3 legs back, third 2 to 3 legs back in most of his recent races. And then the last is the 8 Lucky Curlin, who does have the style, but again, of course, they've been running and claiming races, so I would eliminate that. So we get quickly down to 3 contenders, and now get into the handicapping part, which is Gray's Fable, the 3, who I talked about, who won, who was second last time out at Churchill. Number 5, Fort Washington, who has to come from way back, and the 6 Steady On. And so that's the handicap methodology and how I use pace to get down to my contenders in the race. Now, how this turned out, actually, before we turn it out, we're going to turn it over to Jim and hear his take on it.
Yeah, don't spoil the ending.
That's right. Not at all.
So I'm not quite as technical as Ellis. I'm just going to go through some things that I observed when I haven't handicapped the race, and I used daily racing form figures with buyer figures to handicap most of the time. So the conditions of the race, there's $150,000 listed stakes 4 and up on the mile, on 1 mile on the turf. Track condition that day at Gulfstream was firm. The outside posts are at a disadvantage due to the short run to the turn in a mile race at Gulfstream. And always look at jockeys and trainers, especially at Gulfstream Park. And if you throw everything else out that I say, bet on Irad Ortiz at Gulfstream Park because he had a great weekend. So I got down to 5 contenders. The 1, He's Pure Gold with Lopez and Breen, ran second last out to a return winner, 3rd race off layoff, 4 out of 5 in the money at Gulfstream Park. So if you get the PPs back up there, you want to highlight those. If you look at He's Pure Gold, the 1 horse, and just 4 out of 5 in the money at Gulfstream over there is a nice statistic to look at if you go to Gulfstream Park turf in the
Over the summer
history.
session.
Yeah.
Right.
Then the number 4 Striker, Gallardo and Josie Carroll. First turf trial resulted in 95 buyer at Tampa on February 12th after running on Woodbine synthetic. So that's always a good angle that the horse could run synthetic and then transfer that form over to turf. Fort Washington, the 5 with Jose Ortiz and Suge McGahee, one of 2 McGahee horses in this race, ran in the Canadian turf last at Gulfstream, finishing just behind Steady On with a 95 buyer. And as Ellis mentioned, this horse is a deep closer and almost got there to run down Steady On. Steady On, the 6 with Irad Ortiz and Pletcher. So we've spoiled the ending. We know who's going to win this race. Likely favorite, less than 3 to 1 morning line. He matched the lifetime best with a 95 buyer in the last, edging Fort Washington, 2 for 7 lifetime with 3 seconds. And there's more upside than the rivals because this horse is lightly raced, only 7 lifetime starts as a 4-year-old. And then my long shot was Dreams of Tomorrow, the 12 horse. And I don't think that Ellis mentioned this horse. I have a strange angle. When Suge McGahee enters 2 and one of them's 15 to 1 and one of them is going to be 3 to 1, I'm always going to look at the second one. The only thing with this horse, has the top buyer in the field at 98 at Tampa and a $100,000 claimer, but this horse has a horrible post at Gulfstream. So I didn't think the horse could get up for the win. So what I did is my top picks are Fort Washington and Steady On. And I boxed those 2 in the exacta and I keyed those 2 on top in the trifecta with the 12 thrown in for second with all. So Ellis, you can tell them what happened in the race.
Yeah, well, for that, my strategy was similar. I was looking at the highest odds of my 3 contenders. Gray's Fable, Fort Washington Steady On, and Gray's Fable was the highest of the 3. I think it was about 5 to 1.
Right.
Steady On was about 9 to 5, and Fort Washington was 3 to 1. So I made the win bet on the highest odds and just boxed the 3 horses. And in reality, what happened was Steady On did have that exact same pressing trip that he'd been having. There was a very, very fast pace. Churchtown went out on the lead with Striker. So 2 of those 5, not all of the horses I thought had early pace hit it, but 2 of the 5 went out there and really just went fairly fast. Not fast, you wouldn't see the fractions as fast, 24:47, but fast enough when 2 horses are battling. We know they get tired sometimes. And Steady On went by them. Churchtown, for me, I thought was going to fade with the other ones. He ended up holding on for second at a 13 to 1 and kind of blew out my best because Fort Washington closed very fast and ended up 3rd. So I got split in my exact the 1st and 3rd. So the pace scenario was right, but not perfect in terms of one of the speed horses holding on.
And I got split in my trifecta, King 695, and I had 5 and 6 on top. So that happens a lot. And I think when you're an owner and you look at your horse in a race like this, what you ought to try to do is paint a picture of the race in your mind.
Right.
And you ought to say, what's going to happen here? Where's Irad going with this horse? You mentioned you had 5 early pace horses.
Yes.
They're not all going for the lead.
Right.
So one of these jocks or 2 of these jocks or 3 of these jocks are going to take back. Okay, if you've got an early pace horse that doesn't like taking back, and you think that guy's not quick enough to get the lead, he's probably tossed for you because he's not going to pass horses.
Right. And the opposite is, like you said, with number 12, Grimm's Tomorrow, who was an early pressure type, but the post and the short run to the turn dictates the fact that in this case, Javier Castellano has to send him. And he sent him, but it didn't do any good because by that time, Churchtown and Striker were already gone. So that cost his horse being wide and that. So when you're considering other horses to use with your horse in a race or just handicapping races you don't have a horse in, that would be something to consider. The post dictates pace much of the time.
And you probably ought to put Dreams of Tomorrow in your stable mail because if he gets a better post next time, he's probably going to run better.
That's probably very true. I wanted to add, when we mentioned betting real quick, that one of the things we talked about before we did the webinar was about betting restrictions, and just wanted to touch on that because I think it's very important. People want to know. I reached out to the Kentucky Horse Racing Commission and got a nice email back from our chief steward, Barbara Borden, when I asked about betting restrictions for owners. She can only talk about Kentucky. So I urge everybody to check the restrictions in their particular races. But Kentucky law states there's no restrictions on owners, but Kentucky law states a rider shall not place a wager for those owners that do want to buy tickets or have a wager placed on his or her behalf or accept a ticket except on his or her only mount and except only through the owner or trainer of the horse he or she is riding. And precise records must be kept by trainers and owners who place wagers for their riders. So that's the Kentucky regulation. There's no regulation about owner, but just so you know, if you're making bets for riders. I think we wanted to add something about that as well.
Yeah, part of my job as wagering development director at Keeneland is to maintain wagering integrity. So I manage a lot of tournaments, and we have tournament rules that you can only bet on your horse to win. You cannot box the horse. You cannot bet it below. And I think that's a good rule. If you're an owner of a horse, to maintain the integrity of the game, we have to deal with optics quite a bit in this game. And I think it's a really good idea to only bet on your horse. If you don't like your horse, pass the race. That's just a piece of advice that would help us maintain the integrity of the game.
Absolutely. All right, should we go ahead and move on to Oaklawn race 12?
The Arkansas Derby.
Yes.
We both had an interest in.
Yep, Tom and I both ended up handicapping that race, and definitely one that we're going to take a look at now. So Oaklawn Park race 12 this past Saturday was the Grade 1 Arkansas Derby, 1 1/8 on the dirt, and it's restricted for 3-year-olds. And this was a Kentucky Derby points race, 100 points and automatic start in the starting gate for the winner of this race. Second place, usually they will have points they'll probably get into, but I mean, we might as well go ahead and break down the race. There's a pretty full field in here. I believe was a field of
It was 11.
10, yeah, 10 with a scratch.
Right.
So I'm going to go ahead and briefly talk about the 10 first. That is Red Route 1. That ended up being my top selection here in this race. Now I'll kind of briefly break down how I ended up coming to that point. He's a horse that has kind of key form coming into this race from other Kentucky Derby prep races. I think that's something that specifically when looking at kind of stakes races like this, you look at some of the other key form from stakes races, horses that have won out of these races, or specifically when you're talking about a Kentucky Derby style or a Kentucky Oaks prep race, or maybe a race going into a Breeders' Cup. Horses that are also going to be kind of targeting the same races, how they've done in those races. Those races sometimes will produce winners or they will not be as productive. But this horse was third behind Forte and Loggins in the Breeders' Futurity. Forte, I'm sure most know, won the Florida Derby over the weekend. So definitely key form there with Forte. He was a 2-year-old champion as well. He was 5th behind Two Phils in the Street Sense. Not his best run that day, but still Two Phils won the Jeff Ruby last week. So definitely another key horse on the road to the Kentucky Derby. 4th to Instant Coffee in the Kentucky Jockey Club, 2nd to Arabian Night in the Southwest, and a troubled fast closing 2nd last out the Confidence Game in the Rebel. In his last 2 races, although they were on sloppy surfaces, they were both at Oaklawn. So he's already gone a mile in his 16th twice at Oaklawn Park. So definitely means this horse likes this track. And I think with increased distance, this horse to me was one that's going to continue to get better. But he's one that if you look at his comment lines, he encounters trouble. He isn't the quickest out of the gate. He's prone to traffic. So one thing that I really look at a lot in these types of forms is what is something that's going to be done to maybe eliminate this from happening? What's going to change, And then I see that Steve Asmussen, the trainer, is putting blinkers on here for this horse, 20%, as you'll see in kind of the percentage ranges for Steve first time blinkers. And that's a pretty high number. Definitely indicative that he's not somebody that just kind of throws them on just to, see if it will stick. So I took that really into consideration, the blinkers coming on for him. I've seen it work for his barn a lot, and this horse clearly will get the distance and has a good turn of foot. He's just kind of shying away from horses almost when you watch him, so it could also help with some of his gait behavior. And overall, I thought seemed like a pretty positive move to me with this horse. Horse numbers and figures, he's a horse that keeps improving. If you look at his buyer speed figures on the side over there, he's gradually going up and up and up, even with some trouble trips. He's bred to go further. He's a son of gun runner from a really nice classic female family. He's got the highest last out speed figure of the race. And these are all pretty good races back to back 2 seconds over the track. So I figured with added extra distance, this could be one definitely to take a look at here in this race. And he ended up being my top selection. Then I'm going to go through kind of the other two that I really liked here in this race. I kind of usually narrow it down to a top 3 for me. I will look at all the horses as one as contenders, and I'll kind of assess how I think the pace is going to shape up. So for me, the pace in this race I thought was pretty hot. There were definitely about 3 or 4 horses that I thought I could see going forward and that would be a little bit contentious. So let's go ahead and take a look at the 6 Angel of Empire. That was my top or my second selection here in this race. And usually I will kind of go with whatever one definitely has the best odds, but if I think one maybe is a little bit better than the other one, it's maybe second best odds, I will use that one on top and maybe key the other ones underneath. So Angel of Empire, definitely another one I want to take a look about. Got a really key rider up in Flavian Pratt. Flavian is definitely one of the best riders in the country. And one thing that I really liked about this horse coming into this race is he's already been a mile and an eighth. That was at Fairgrounds, and he's got one race at Oaklawn. He was second behind a Victory Formation. So we know he will run well over the surface, and we know he's going to stay the distance. And does come out of some decently key races. Victory Formation has been, on the trail for a little while. I believe he's going to be going to the Bluegrass next week. So definitely another key type of a race that this horse comes out of. So I'm thinking that as long as the pace shapes up the way I think it will, he's another one that's kind of got that late closer, mid-pack type of profile. And he's going to be one that's definitely going to be there late. We know he likes the track, and we know that he's going to stay the distance. So that was what I weighed in with that in the jockey trainer numbers between Brad Cox and Flavian Pratt, although not a huge amount, definitely big enough. Small sample size, but definitely consistent enough that you absolutely have to take note of that. So he was one that I liked in there as well, and I had him in my second spot. I'm going to take a look at the 7 Rocket Can. He's just below Angel of Empire there. He was another one. He's coming in from Gulfstream. Hasn't been over the Oaklawn surface yet, but he's coming out of some nice races. He won the Holy Bowl back in early February at Gulfstream. Gulfstream produces some good horses, obviously, on the Kentucky Derby Trail, but he's got races behind Instant Coffee, Confidence Game, Disarm, other horses that are also on the Derby Trail. So this horse is definitely one that fits right in with that type of class. And I really took note of the race he ran last out against Forte in the Fountain of Youth coming into this race. But I did obviously know that he is trying to get away from Forte. So comes to this race because connections are thinking that this is probably going to be the easier spot. They're not going to have to go up against Forte in the Florida Derby, which Forte won the Florida Derby. So they probably ended up making the right decision. Definitely one thing to note about this horse as well, and you can see it on most of these other forms. This horse has never ran with Lasix, so Lasix is not a problem for him at all. It's definitely something to look at sometimes, whether you're going from an allowance race or maiden to a stakes race. There's different regulations, and keeping Junior Alvarado back aboard Junior going in with that horse to ride him, definitely a good thing. And Bill Mott is definitely a trainer that you have to watch with when he ships his horses. He's a very good shipping trainer. So one that I always take special note of his horses, especially if there are prices in races, to keep in the back of my mind. And this horse, he isn't really necessarily a stalker, a mid-pack horse or a closer, but he's got enough tactical speed where he can sit pretty much anywhere in a race, and he's still going to be able to have that turn of foot. And the jockey's going to be able to put him wherever they feel is going to be the best with his trip. So those were the 3 that I ended up on top. Red Route 1 was the one that I thought had the most upside with the equipment change of the blinkers. He's got good numbers over this track already, highest last out buyer speed figures. And I think he was going to be one that was definitely going to get the distance. So he was my selection on top of Tom, how did you see this race?
I'm going to throw out one caveat before I go into the race, and that is this is mostly owners, I'm told, that we're talking to, and understand that when, like Jim and I do a weekly podcast of a late pick four, and we're analyzing 4 races at a track, 1 track each week, and we're all doing races, analyzing races and making picks. Understand we're doing that for horse players, and we're doing it in a short window. I think we all are fans of the game, and we have great respect for anybody who puts their money up and takes a shot with horses. And so don't take it as a slight. And that's, if you own the horse, I understand that can be hard to do, but just understand that we're speaking to a different audience than a group of owners when we're doing what we do. I say that because I start by trying to sometimes poke holes in favorites to see if I can find a horse at a price. And so that's where I started at in this race. I kind of came in with the idea, I wasn't particularly high on any of the horses in the Arkansas Derby. And I'll tell you why, the reason I was making that case when we go back to the past performances. We'll start with Red Route 1 for Asmussen. I actually like this horse as a Derby prospect because, which sounds contrary to what I'm saying, I'm trying to poke a hole in the horse here for this particular race. I like the fact that he ran an 87 Beyer in his first start as a 3-year-old, which is better than any start at 2. I think that's, to me, a good sign. And then I like the fact that he improved a little more in the second out. And he's doing this from closing way back. I just didn't think there was enough pace in here to maybe give him his best chance to win, even though he's getting a little more distance. And I think with being out of a Tappet mare by Gunrunner, he's going to love 1.25 miles. I think it's a very dangerous horse on Derby day. Going to be ironic if Asmussen wins the Derby with a horse like this after missing narrowly with Epicenter last year. But I just didn't think the circumstances fit well. And also, you're going to get a better price in the Derby because they put blinkers on and it didn't really work so well, and he didn't run great. And so his price is going to go up. So, but anyway, that's why I was against Red Route 1 in here. Angel of Empire. Great respect for Brad Cox. And I will start by saying, I learned a long time ago, about 10% of the owners or 10% of the trainers and jockeys win 90% of the races. It was an axiom, I think my friend Mike Pataglia gave out at a handicapping class I attended when I was probably in college. And I think it still holds true. So that's usually kind of where I start. Angel of Empire. So you got a great trainer, great rider, but nobody wants to ride this horse a second time, was my thought. Look at all the different jocks. So I'm thinking, okay, maybe he's just okay. He's a nice horse, but he's not a superstar. Then I looked at Rocket Can, and his best Beyer's a 91. Angel Empire's best Beyer's at 89. Solid, but not blowing my doors off. Reincarnate, 2 starts back. A Bob Baffert horse at 16-1. Okay, I think I can beat him in a race like this. He's 5-2. I'm not taking 5-2 on that horse. So, you know, a lot of it's, weighing risk versus reward, and at 5-2, so I'm not looking at that. So where did I end up? I looked at, and I didn't actually think I liked this horse going into the race, and ended up watching a couple of replays, which I like to do, especially for these big races. Bourbon Bash, the 1 horse. A little spoiler alert, it didn't turn out well. But I looked at the last race. First, broke from a 10 hole going 1 mile and 16, so had a bad post. Got a horrendous ride, was out in the parking lot in the first turn, and then was hustled up into a fast pace. They went a half in 46, and this horse was and ran respectably. And I thought, with a much better inside post, there's not a ton of speed. I'm looking for a price anyway. I like the jock change to Rayla Gutierrez. Horses run well at Oaklawn, showed some real talent last year in a maiden win by 8 at Saratoga. So that's how I ended up on this horse. Not necessarily, I made a small win bet. I keyed him in some exactas with the logical horses. You could also play like a small try, like a 50-cent try on a horse like this, key him 2nd and 3rd. Horse didn't run well. Got into a little traffic again down along the inside. Didn't turn out well for my wager, but I felt like my opinion was somewhat justified in that a morning line horse of 30-1, I think the 9 horse, got up to run second coming off a maiden win. So kind of thinking something crazy could happen. Wasn't that wild an opinion to have. I just got to the wrong horse. And this horse at a big price ended up getting second. So sometimes, I go back and look at it and think, well, my reasoning was okay. I just ended up in the wrong pew at the right church. So, and Angel of Empire was very impressive. And so clearly, some of the skepticism I had on that horse, this particular day anyway, wasn't justified. He ran a tremendous race, won off and won very impressively. So that's kind of when I'm starting to handicap a race, I'm looking. It could be affinity for the track or disdain for the track. If I can poke some holes in the favorite, then I can start looking for a little bit of a price. Or sometimes if the favorite looks just so good, then maybe I'm looking for that 30-1 underneath horse, like in this race. If I've really been high on Angel of Empire, maybe I take 3 or 4 prices underneath in a wide open race or a race where there's maybe just one strong contender. I actually thought about doing that on Forte in the Florida Derby and thinking he wouldn't lose, and then using some long shots underneath. Ended up not doing that because Forte was kind of keyed up, and I didn't feel good about the way he was coming into the race with his look on track and some of his demeanor, so I just passed the race completely. But anyway, that's how I ended up on a horse that didn't run well, Bourbon Bash. So sometimes your reasoning is sound and you still lose money. Welcome to horse racing.
Well, let me add one thing real quick, because you made a point about you talking about Red Route 1 as a Derby contender. And for those folks who are listening, us as handicappers are not only thinking, particularly starting in the fall, but mostly in February, March, April, and May, we're not only looking at these races to handicap these races, we're looking at the Derby. So I think I put words in your mouth. When you said Red Route 1's Derby contender, you meant you like him in the Derby, you weren't sure about him today. Is that
exactly?
Exactly.
I thought I could beat him today because of the circumstances. But so I'm actually from a wagering standpoint, I like the way the race played out because I think he's a horse that I'm probably going to have using some bets on Kentucky Derby Day.
Right.
And I just got a better price because of the way this race played out.
And as a similar point, real quick, if we can pull up the PPs, I know we're going to.
I think we got some questions here in just a minute. Yeah.
Yeah, just really quick, pull the PPs on Angel of Empire, for example, back in that race to talk about this. So for those of you that have horses in races or handicapping races, we're looking for these athletes to improve. So here's an example, as you mentioned, his first race off a little layoff on November 22nd was a 74 buyer. And then his first race as a 3-year-old was an 85 and now an 89. I don't know what he got for this race. I didn't look it up, but I'm sure it was better.
Like a 94.
94.
Yeah. So one of the things we talked about with speed figures is not just the figure itself, but the progression with 2-year-olds and 3-year-olds that you can use when you're looking at races you have horses in, or looking at the competition or races you're betting that you don't have a horse in terms of looking for patterns of improvement. Those only apply, in my opinion, and I think you folks will probably agree, as the horses are making their second, third, fourth start. And then again, as a 3-year-old, you start looking at a new pattern.
Yeah, or when they're doing something different.
Correct.
When they're changing from one surface to the other, or they're putting blinkers on, or all these changes that trainers can make.
One other time I would look at it is with claimers. They go in and out of form.
Correct.
So if a horse has been out of form, starts to trend back up, then it's where I think you can get glean some meaningful
some
information.
predictive value.
Yes.
Let's go ahead and throw it back to Gary just real quick.
Okay, all right. Yeah, and we have a few questions that have already come in, so let's just jump on a few of these and see what we can come up with. Okay, how much weight do any of you give to the jockey trainer while you're handicapping a race? And I know a couple of you hit on the jockey and the trainer, but maybe you can expand on that a little bit.
I would say a lot. It kind of depends on, I know, track too, because there's so many different tracks that a jockey and a trainer compare at. But for example, I handicap Turfway Park and we just finished up Turfway Park. There's so many like key jockey and trainer pairs. I'm trying to think of one off the top of my head, specifically while I'm thinking about it. Gerardo Corrales and Mike Maker is a great example. Yeah. They do well at Turfway, but they also did fantastic at Churchill Downs. They did good at Kentucky Downs. So you kind of have to think of where the track is as a whole, as well as the jockey and the trainer. And you kind of have to think of, is this trainer using other jockeys? Is this the first call rider for this trainer. So it's something that I carry a lot of weight to, especially if the jockey has rode this horse for the trainer before, or if it's a horse coming off the claim, the trainer decides to leave the previous jockey on instead of trade it out for somebody else.
I look a little bit at from the standpoint of I handicap for fun. Enjoy playing the races. The jockey's agent handicaps to put food on the table. So the guy who's doing the handicapping to put his or her jock on the right horse, I think that kind of leads you to playing the percentages. Those guys who are affiliated with the best riders are getting them onto the best stock, and over time the percentages are in your favor. That those men and women are going to find their way to the winner's circle more often.
And I think at Oakland too, Ron Moquette and Bejarano, good combinations. Bejarano used to be a great jock. He's riding really well for Ron Moquette right now.
Reinventing himself with
And he's
Moquette,
coming
for
back
sure.
to Kentucky, I think. So
He
I think
is.
you can look at that and don't just look at the percentages. See when the trainer puts a jock on his horse, if the trainer is really serious about winning that race.
And sometimes it could be a particular trainer's pattern. It might not always be the biggest name jock.
True.
That might be a tip, but you learn that over time. Of when he uses this particular guy, he's really serious.
I'll add in context that, with using the Arkansas Derby as an example, I think jockey trainer combinations aren't as important, especially when you get to Kentucky Derby, because you're going to have the jockey that normally rides for the trainer a lot or has ridden the horse and knows. But in your bread and butter races, jockey trainer combination is not that important, but it's certainly a factor to weigh, and particularly in context with a jockey that hasn't ridden a horse in a while, because I'm looking at representative races. So if I see a jockey that rides for a trainer that maybe didn't ride a horse a couple times, and all of a sudden the trainer's giving that jockey a leg up, and it's a high percentage jockey trainer combination, I'm going to give a little extra weight.
Okay, here's an interesting question. As an owner, most races are claiming races. I was hoping that you might be able to address how to handicap horses to claim, what to look for, the good and the bad.
Who wants to take that?
That's a tough one.
That is a tough one.
Tom, you take that.
I'll take, like Jim, I use the racing form and buyer speed figures, but the sheets are an option. It's I think priced out of my game the way I'm not handicapping every day in and day out. But if you're living in that world as an owner, the value may be there. Whatever it is, look for patterns. Try to find. But it's much like the ad for Bessemer Trust at the start of this. They had a great line in there. It's not what you look at; it's what you see. So we can all look at the past performances. Try to see horses that are coming into form, maybe through a buyer speed figure pattern, or maybe their talent has been masked by poor post positions in recent races or bad trips, and maybe you go back a little further and think this horse has some ability and he or she just hasn't had a chance to show it as much lately because of circumstances. Or you try to get some intel in terms of people whose opinions you trust, and how is this horse training, or what he's over the top right now, or she's going down in form. You don't want this horse, or this horse is starting. This horse has his training better, has really picked it up in the last month. Again, so that has to be a unique situation. If you have access to somebody who's intel, so to speak, you trust at the track, that can be valuable as well. But look for improving, ascending versus descending. Maybe it's probably the easiest way.
And also to add to that, you mentioned back to representative similar. If you see a horse running in 3 or 4 route races and the form is poor, but there's a sprint, especially if you or your trainer that you use is looking at the condition book, there's a sprint coming up at that same claiming level coming up, in 3 weeks or 4 weeks, and you see a horse they've been trying routes, but the horse's race 4, 5, 6 back was a sprint. It was a good race. Perhaps that's what the horse wants to do, and the other trainer just has it in their head that that's what the horse is better at routing, and you might just be the believer, or your trainer is the believer that this horse really wants to sprint. You claim the horse, put it back in a sprint, and something good could come from it.
One other thought I'll go to is well, just a quick one is, and you can see this sometimes in other sports, maybe with coaching, where coach shows ability, but then maybe gets the next job Is it, maybe it doesn't work out, but maybe that was because of circumstances. Point being, if a horse has shown some significant ability, then there's always a chance he or she can get back to that level. If they've never shown it, then at some point they're probably not going to. But if they've shown it, then look in there is there a reason why they're not showing it now? Or is there something that my trainer can do to help this horse get back because we know the talent is in there?
Okay, hey, one more question. I think we've got a couple more races you guys are going to handicap. So here's a good question. Would love to hear the panel's perspective on the weight a horse carries, and specifically how you handicap a claiming race when the weights are reduced by lowering the claiming price. So the weight that the horse carries, how does that factor in?
I would say for me, weight isn't too big of a factor. It kind of really depends on, I would say, the jockey, say an apprentice. When apprentice first start out, I believe that they have a 10-pound weight allowance. That's a pretty big one. And if you've got an apprentice, a good example would be Walter Rodriguez at Turfway, to go back to Turfway, just because of the recency bias. I've been there. We had an apprentice win the jockey title. And he was an exceptional jockey, but he also did have that weight allowance. So it did kind of give you that extra little bit of thinking, just a little bit. But I would say for me, when it comes to weights, definitely obviously depends with claiming races, handicaps, stuff like that. If it's anything less than 5 pounds, I don't really take it too much into account. But I would say definitely, 5 to 7 pounds, or certainly anything close to 10 can maybe be the difference between a head or a neck. Definitely something to really think about. But I would say the most time that I take weights into effect is if you have an apprentice rider that's either going to have a 10-pound bug, a 7-pound bug, or a 5-pound bug, and then eventually they become a journeyman and they lose that. But perfect example of Walter Rodriguez, an exceptional rider, where you do get that weight allowance.
I think a separate question, I think kind of referring from what Gary said, and I have an opinion, but I'd like your Jim or Tom's, is when a claiming, there's a claiming range, 20,000 to 15,000, and you get a few extra pounds for 15. Do you think that makes a difference, either of you?
I think it makes a little bit of a difference. I mean, if you're willing to sell the horse for 15 rather than 20 to gain 3 pounds, for example, those horses are probably equal in ability. Okay, so if you're looking at a $15,000 claimer, that's probably his level. Especially if he's raced a number of times, a trainer and an owner have decided that they're going to let that horse go for 15,000. But I'm like Caitlin, I don't really put a lot of stock in weights, but in that case, I probably would. And the other thing I want to point out is you also have to look at trainer intent and owner intent when it comes to claiming races. Example, Ken Ramsey wants to win races. You can't just judge because he's put a horse in there, a claiming price of 25,000. It may be worth more than that, but he wants to win races at various racetracks, and he's not as active as he was. But you also have to worry about, is that horse actually worth the price that the trainer and the owner are putting on it, especially at those lower level claiming prices.
I know the legendary Bobby Frankel was a huge believer in weight for horses, from everything I've heard from people who worked around it. I just don't feel like I have a good feel for it, coming up with how to pardon the pun, weight the value of that. So I don't really pay much attention to it. I'm like what Caitlin said, if it's from my world, you can look at it, a little bit like 3-point shooting, in that if one team makes 8 and the other team makes 6, that's not a great disparity. One team makes 10 and the other makes 2, that disparity is interesting. We just don't see much disparity anymore. Back in the days of Forgo, he'd carry 140 and somebody being with 110. You don't see that kind of disparity anymore.
You do see switches sometimes in more in stakes races, where one time a horse will 124, another one will have 120, and now the horse that 120 and one, he's got 126. The other horse is 122, as an example. That's a 6-pound shift, and that could easily make up for a neck or a nose or a head defeat, right?
Sure. Okay, Caitlin, I'm going to drop off now. Audience, keep your questions coming. We're going to go another 15-20 minutes with our panelists, and then we'll go to the next session of Q&A. So I'm going to drop off and let you guys carry on.
Okay, well, we're going to go ahead and pick up back where we left off. We've got a couple more races. We'll see kind of which ones we get to, but I know the next one that we had here on the docket, I believe, was
Oaklawn 11.
Oaklawn 11. So let's go ahead and see if we
Yeah,
can.
so we picked this one, Jim and I, because this is a sprint. We wanted to make sure we tried to cover turf and route and sprint and hopefully cover that. And this was, again, I'm going to talk about a pace perspective, just going down the field fairly quickly, maybe quicker than last time. But if you look at this horse, Go West, you can see the last 3 races. Those are all 1s and 2s early. So that's definitely the early style horse. Like I said, that's usually on the lead or within a length of the lead for the most part, likes to have a lead. Certainly the rail, again, talking about position in conjunction with running style. This is a horse that is gonna probably want the front no matter what. Gonna go all the way to the outside to the 12, exact same issue. The horse was second last time out around the track. Now, personally, for me, if I see horses that run second around the track, I look for their winning races. So we'll go down to that race, January 29, 2022 at Oaklawn. The horse was second, first. Normally when a horse runs second around the track, just my opinion is this horse followed the leader, and that's the same as leading from wire to wire. This horse is definitely early. So now, even stopping right here, you've got the one horse who the jockey is going to be forced to push the one horse for pace from the rail, and the 12 by the same token, who normally you could relax a horse a little bit on the outside, but probably is going to have to use a lot of that horse's speed. And so you've got the 1 and the 12, the 4 real quick, Dr. Perry, the only good races, the only horse, the race won back in October of 21 was wire to wire, hasn't made the lead since, and did close for second one before last. So earlier pressure type. The 7, the same style, Emerald Forest, almost always up close, especially in the recent races. Also, I look to see if horses wearing blinkers, which definitely means in most cases the horse is going to be forwardly placed. The 9 also the same thing. Number 9, Absolute Chaos, who did scratch, but originally my assessment was. So I was left with number 2, Breslau, just to quickly talk about, who did go wire to wire last time, but showed the ability to relax. One before last and come from off the pace. Last time out was a 91 buyer, an 82 before that. So those are both good, both off the claim by Contreras, as you can see. So a couple of the career best races. Either way, the horse looked very tactical in terms of its speed. And number 5, Ultimate, who had closed last time out from 9th to 4th, but the best race where it was close was 4 races ago on January the 6th, we're close to the 7th, the 2nd. So you got one horse that's kind of a presser, one that's kind of a closer. I thought there was going to be up to 6 horses in this race that were going to lead, and I won't give it away till Jim's done, but I was dead wrong.
You all are wrong sometimes.
That's right. Right. Like Tom said, right? Church wrong pew.
Exactly.
Yeah.
When I started handicapping this race, I came upon a nugget that really worked out well for me in the long run. And if you'll highlight the conditions of the race up here, this is one of those things that you've got, okay, 6 furlong allowance, and it's for 3-year-olds and up, which have never won 23,000 other than maiden claiming starter or stake rate allowance, or which have never won 2 races. Now, that's a lot of things to say that the horse that's only won 1 race in this race has an extreme disadvantage, because racing secretaries write these kind of races to get the maximum number of horses, and there's 2 ways to qualify. And one of the ways you qualify is don't win enough money. So take a look at number 1, Go West, which is my top pick in this race. And that horse raced at Sam Houston. So if you go back to the 2nd and 3rd races on the page where he won 2 straight at Sam Houston with a 100 buyer and 84 buyer, look how cheap those races are, $36,000 allowance races, which means they won about 60% of 36,000, which they won about $20,000. This horse barely fits the conditions. And when I see a multi-condition race, I will always bet the horse that barely fits the conditions. So that's one reason I like Go West. Some of the other horses fit as well. And that's one reason I didn't really like the 12 horse Favorite Outlaw. I love Ariad and Hartman, but on the outside, only won 1 race, and that was the negative. And that's why I chose the 1 over the 12. If I'd been smart enough to bet the race like I thought, I don't have a lot of money, but I didn't do that. We'll go over that in a minute. The track condition, Oaklawn's been sloppy much of the winter, but the track is fast today. That's key in some of these horses that did not run well in the slop. The post position for a 6 furlong race, the inside with speed is preferred. And there are good jockeys here. Gutierrez, Gaffleone in for the Arkansas Derby, but picked up a mount here for Calhoun on Go West. And then Torres and Arietta are also riding. So my top pick was Go West for the reasons that I mentioned. And also he disappointed on a sloppy track February 25th. So he dropped back from 100 buyer to a 91. He went off at a little more than 2-1 there, but I think the horse probably didn't much care for the track. He's getting a fast track today, which he should move back to his previous level. A lot of times they overlook horses coming in from Sam Houston here. But this horse had such good form, and it was everything pointed to this horse to me. The two Breslau coming off a lifetime best in a win over the track at the distance, February 18th, had a really good buyer progression, seems to have found himself as a 4-year-old. And he made the conditions by winning a high level claiming and starter allowance in his last 2. So there's another horse that just barely makes the conditions and has good positional speed and a really good morning line of 6-1. Favorite Outlaw, we mentioned. I love Chris Hartman. If you look at Chris Hartman, Arietta, they're 25%. Hartman is 31% for Oakland meet, having a great meet. And then the last horse that I used was Emerald Forest for Rodriguez and Diodoro, won 2 of the last 3.
7.
I'm sorry.
The 7.
7.
Oh, the 7. I put the wrong number. Okay.
Emerald Forest.
All right. Emerald Forest won 2 of the last 3 and has 9 lifetime wins. That's another important thing when you've got horses that only won 1 time. Horses won 9 out of 23. You've got to look at them. Moving up in class off good efforts at fairgrounds. The negatives were never raced at Oakland, and speed figures are consistently below the top 2. So I wound up picking Go West to win, an exacta box 1-2, which was my big mistake, and trifecta king 1-2 with 1-2-5-12 with 1-2-5-9-12, and I failed to put all in the third leg. And as we talk about the way it ended up, that cost me about $350.
So 2 things happened here. This in my case analysis was there was a lot of speed to Go West and Favorite Outlaw would have to, and it did happen that Favorite Outlaw cleared Go West. He got a length and a half lead in the first quarter mile.
Yeah.
And Go West showed an ability he hadn't before because, as I said last time, he followed the leader around the track. This time he followed the leader and he passed the leader. Yeah. And so Go West passed Favorite Outlaw. Breslau did not close at all. And the horse named Excel basically ran 3rd around the track at 90-1.
78-1.
So yeah. Excel ran 3rd from start to finish. So basically it was almost, we call it a carousel race of sorts. Merry-go-round, yes. And they ran 1, 2, 3. So at least Jim got a win bet, I hope.
I did have a win bet, and I did use the horse in the pick 5, which I happened to hit that day. So it didn't pay very much, but I did single the horse in pick 5.
For the owners out there, we're going to talk about, I'm sure when we get done, some of the multiple bets, those are the hardest, and that's where you get kind of getting lucky and good.
All right, well, real quick, we'll talk about the last one, which is Gulfstream Race 9. If you want to go ahead and pull up those PPs, I believe Tom and I both looked at this race. So this was a little bit of an interesting race. Let's go ahead and talk about the 2 My Prankster first. He was your morning line favorite in here, and I'm kind of the same way Tom is, especially when I'm handicapping in a specific track. If I think there's a favorite that's unbeatable, I'll roll with it and try to build around them elsewhere. But this was the race where I thought I really had a chance to beat this horse. My Prankster was coming in off of a pretty long layoff. He's a good horse, and he kind of fits the condition of, right around being in that 6 furlong, 7 furlong, 1 mile type of, range for this race. 7 furlongs is a really type of a tricky distance because you're thinking, horses that want to go maybe just beyond 6 furlongs, which is kind of like some of your more classic sprint type of distance, 6.5 furlongs. And then you're going to have horses that are dropping back from a mile and a 16th going to 7 furlongs instead. And, they're going around that 1 turn. There's some races and tracks that do have a 2-turn mile. So these are horses that are going to be dropping back from 1 turn. It does make a difference, horses being able to have a turn or not. But My Prankster hadn't raced in quite a while. So I was looking, definitely Todd Pletcher does have a decent, percentage horses coming in off of a layoff. But I was looking for a horse that maybe has a little bit more upside to him when it comes to the track, recency bias, and certainly trying to just beat this horse overall, because I do think he is a beautiful horse and he is coming in off that shelf. And I wasn't impressed with his last out race behind Goodnight because he was a little bit wide, but he didn't have that much of an excuse and clearly had to have some time off. So I was looking as Tom said, to poke some holes. So that brings me to the 4 horse. Let's go down to Weyburn. Definitely not a super juicy price here in this race, but I thought Weyburn had a lot of upside. He's a horse that is a true 7 furlong horse. So he definitely fits the distance here. He's not a grass horse. He's a dirt horse. He's going to get that fast track at Gulfstream. And he's never been worse than second at that 7 furlong distance. He broke his maiden point in the distance. He was able to step up to a mile off the shelf last out and win that grade 3 Gotham Stakes, which is a 1-turn mile. So he's a horse that wants to go 1 turn between 7 furlongs to a mile, but he really is a 7 furlong horse if you look at that form. He took some time off prior to this race last year, came into this race in 2022 off of a 7-month layoff on the shelf. And it's a horse that really does well either first or second up off the layoff versus my prankster. I think will not be as sharp off the layoff. This horse is second up off the layoff here. And he won this race last season off of the layoff, or earned a career best numbers and figures there in that race, and already had beat a couple. They're going to reoppose him in this start again. He loves Gulfstream. He won this race last year. Last out 7 months, again coming in off the shelf. He was second behind Wardabario, a pretty nice horse. So I used that. He had trouble in that last out race, kind of broke a little bit crooked. So I thought as long as he got out of the gate pretty cleanly, he would fare well. Second up over off the layoff on a track he likes at a perfect distance for him. He's back with his original trainer, Jerkins, which I really, really liked. A super underrated trainer. I think he deserves more horses and does super well with him. So I like that he was back in his previous barn. He's got more tactical speed than a lot of these horses have. So I thought overall he was a total package. If I was going to use somebody to try to beat my prankster, Weyburn was the one that I was really looking for.
I want to just real quick mention, you talk about trouble, most people that are listening, but over on the right where it's got the short comment, like for Weyburn, AWKST, those are the chart callers, short comments, and just fantastic. And there's if you go to the actual charts at equibase.com, they get the whole thing, but they take away the vowels. So AWK start means awkward start for those that don't know. And when you're looking for trouble lines, certainly do it. Some products like the Equibase program, by the way, does put a red triangle to the left of that, which highlights trouble, which is sort of have a trouble line, awkward start. So that was what you were referring to.
All right, Tom.
This is a race when I'm handicapping where once in a while you have that horse or the past performance block that just seems to glow. Kind of back to the line of, what you look at, what you see. Look at the 2 horse, the Bad Morning Line to start with. And that's always a good thing to get your interest. Bad Morning Line. Yeah. Okay. We can work with this. Speed figures are nothing special. Off since last summer, and 5 to 2 is no rate. It's Pletcher is, I'm sure inside is the main reason, it's connections. But I thought this horse was very vulnerable and could, easily, there were 3 or 4 horses I liked better. So great. Now this is a great opportunity. And even though the public recognized this, they made Weyburn the favorite, but this horse still was 4 to 1. So he took a lot of money, which was dead money to me in terms of being a horse player. The 1 horse, Weyburn for the reasons Caitlin mentioned, the 1 horse in good form, 95 buyer last time out, 9 out of 12 times has been in the top 2 at Gulfstream. 3 out of 4 times at 7 furlongs has been either first or second. Definite major player, got his regular rider. And then you go down to the 6 horse. And because of this Bad Morning Line, we get somewhere around 6 to 1 on a horse with Irad Ortiz in the saddle. It was 8 to 1 on the morning line. You know you're never going to get that, but you still got 6. And this horse coming off a layoff, finished 5th. That 92 from the buyer figure can help you. 92 is as high as any other race the horse has ever shown on his past performance block. So caught a tough field and finished 5th, but that was a tougher spot than most of these were in. So those were 3 very logical contenders who happened to all hit the wire together in the race, and Weyburn wins it. Now, the thing for me is I will acknowledge, and I'm trying to work on this, I'm a much better handicapper than I am a bettor. At a race like this, I might well have taken, I can get 6 to 1 on Irad Ortiz. I'm keying that horse with these other 2. And Irad finished 3rd in the 3-horse photo. So, but if you box them, you got 25-60. in a race where the 2-to-1 favorite won the race for a $2 exacta. And if Steel Sunshine had been able to get in the top two at 6-to-1, that would have been even much better. So the fact that this race was just the reason I want to use this race, just what a bad morning line can do for you sometimes.
Definitely a clear example of looking, as you said, to try to poke holes in a favorite. This race was a textbook example.
Yeah, I think it's a good point. One, again, kind of, we talked about pace and the categories. Favorites are legitimate, vulnerable, and false. Legitimate, vulnerable, and false. We might use different words. Legitimate is a horse that fits on everything. Vulnerable is could do well, but doesn't have to. And false means, in this case, you got a horse, by the way, back to my prankster, don't bring it up again, but that race coming off a layoff last year at 7 furlongs, finished fourth to 7-5, coming off a layoff at 7 furlongs in a stakes race here.
Yeah.
Well, is that last race representative, or is there some reason the horse should run well? More reasons the horse is not going to run well. So I would judge my prankster as a false favorite. And the public in this case, as you said, did actually agree.
And the hardest thing about making a morning line, I've had a lot of experience with this because we changed morning line makers at Keeneland.
Yeah.
So one of the things that I talk with Nick about all the time is it's not who's going to win the race, it's how the public is going to.
Fair point.
Exactly.
Right. So when
Exactly.
you look at my prankster, Pletcher, Jockey, had lost to Gunite the last 2 times, who went up going overseas and running really well over there. So that's what you have to project. And then as a gambler, you have to understand, okay, we know why the public is betting a Pletcher horse that raced against Gunite the last 2 times out, but I don't like that horse. So that's an advantage for you as a gambler.
And the
Absolutely.
public did something it doesn't always do. A lot of times morning lines are right. The public weighted Wayburn's race on March 4th, where he finished second, higher than my prankster's better races from last year. And that's why Wayburn got bet more heavily at the end.
And Wayburn was a really big horse too. You see the size of the horse. Yeah.
I think we've got some more questions coming up here from Gary, so look ahead.
Okay, all right, yeah, this goes back to the old saying, time flies when you're having fun. The time really went quickly. But first, let's, while we sort through those questions, let's hear from our Q&A sponsor, West Point Thoroughbreds.
How do you become the gold standard in racing partnerships? One horse, one partner, one victory at a time. Congratulations to all our partners who have made West Point the gold standard for the last 3 decades.
Okay, so let's jump into the questions that are in the queue right now. So here's one. There are literally hundreds of variables to consider when handicapping. Does the panel agree on 5 or so criteria or angles that should always be considered when you're handicapping a race? Lots to look at. So what are those 4 or 5 things that should never be overlooked?
Y'all don't mind, I'll kick it off. It really goes down to what you think is representative in the horse's past as similar to today. So I would say the distance, the surface, the class, the jockey, and I probably stop at 4.
The trainer.
And the trainer. Thank you, Jim. Yeah.
I would definitely agree. I'd say class is probably my biggest one, and you can certainly look at that as indicative on the forms, like Ella said, and jockey, another huge one. Jockey trainer combinations is something that I do a lot of. I already mentioned that. So those would definitely be big ones for me. And honestly, surface, definitely going between 2 different types of tracks. One that I think is a really good example is going between Churchill and Keeneland. There's not many horses that will run well at both tracks. They're different types of surfaces. So I would say going from a different track to a different surface, turf to dirt, definitely.
Go back to representative, similar. You say,
Right.
I say representative, you may say similar race from a horse's past.
Yeah.
One of the most important things to consider.
A lot of times have friends going to Keeneland, and they're not regular horse players, but they're going to Keeneland or going to Churchill for the week, big race day or something. So I'll try to give them with all this, like a company, you're looking at the prospectus and it's like, looks like Mandarin Chinese if you don't really understand it. So what are a few things they can focus on? Jockey trainer, I talk about. Tell them, look at that. How, to your point, Kayla, how's the horse done at the track? They tell you in that past performance block, and it may not be anything meaningful, but 4 starts, 3 wins at the track. That's meaningful data to have. 4 starts, no top 3 finishes, also meaningful. So doesn't necessarily mean maybe those 4 starts, the horse really didn't have a chance to finish in the top 3. It was just over his or her head. But it's something to look at. And then probably for me, the other thing that I would look at is speed figures.
And I would say, adding to what you already said, post position,
Good one.
class, moving up from one class to another or dropping down in one class to another.
Absolutely.
And don't ever bet a horse doing something for the first time.
Absolutely.
Especially as a favorite.
Correct.
That's right.
Okay. How much time do you recommend that a handicapper review their methodology and their selections after the race was run?
I have a rule that served me very well. My mentor, the late Dick Mitchell, taught me years ago, which is about 24 hours after the races, when the stings worn off, for the ones you've gotten wrong, you take a look, you take your program back out, and you will find about 50% of the time you can see what you missed, but you wouldn't be kicking yourself at that point. So you make a note, and your mind is just so wonderful that it adds to your arsenal about what to look at an upcoming race. To help you out. So you look at it and just move on to analyze it. I take 5 minutes, look at a race, a couple days later, what did I miss? I don't look at the race that I got right, because you don't need to reinforce that. That's what I was taught.
What if you just got really lucky?
That's true.
Okay.
That's why you don't look at ones that you got right, because you may have gotten one.
Yeah, and I think time is well spent doing race replays.
Yes,
You cannot spend a better use of your time if you're serious about horse playing than looking at race replays.
And once you played a couple of days ago, look at the replay. See how
And head-ons as well as pan shots.
One other thing I'll add in terms of rear view mirror handicapping, and I've tried to be better at this myself in recent years. I would not gonna, break the bank with a budget on a day at the track. So playing maybe some exactas or tries to try to get that big score. And I would come back to the track. I picked 6 winners and I lost money today. So I've tried to be better about it, especially with a horse that's a price that's higher than I think he or she should be, is just make a win bet. And at least you walk away. I picked the winner. I was right about that. And I got rewarded for it. I missed the exact, I missed the try, but it was just always so frustrating. I knew that horse was going to win, and the 30-1 horse ran second. I got nothing because I was playing 4 seconds.
Yeah, I make win bets first also, and then you play around with the exotic.
And just like anything else, press your opinion.
That was definitely one of my main focuses when I was coming in. I'm so glad you said that the win bet is so underrated, especially when you think you're getting fair odds, if not more than fair odds. It doesn't hurt you to do that. It covers yourself, especially if you're going to be using various other types of wagers. That's something that I've really had to think of, with my job. I'm trying, to give out pick 4, pick 5 tickets and trying to, go up and down with different types of horizontal wagers. But the win bet, you see a horse that you think would probably go off at 6-1, the horse is maybe 7, 8, 9-1. What's it going to hurt?
It's good for your psyche too.
Absolutely.
Yeah. All right, I got several more questions, so let's try to get to as many as we can. So talk about the importance of pedigree and handicapping, especially in maiden races.
I'll take that one.
Go.
Especially in maiden races is something that I really look at with handicapping, especially when you're debuting at 2 turns, you're on turf versus dirt. It's definitely important with maiden races because one thing that I have really taught myself to look at is I will go under the stallion sire in types of their percentages. You can either find it on the DRF forums. I believe Brisbane has an Equibase. You can find this information. You can find it pretty much anywhere. One thing that I really look at with the stallions is their win percentage with first time starters. I think that's something that's kind of a way where you can, in maiden races, kind of, build prices to use underneath, or if you like a horse that's a price maybe on top, that can reinforce your opinion a little bit. So I think that's definitely important in maiden races, and something that a lot of people don't look at is sire percentages with first time starters or horses that are doing something different. This doesn't necessarily need to be maiden races, but horses maybe transferring a surface or horses stepping up a trip or cutting back a trip, looking at a sire and seeing, well, synthetic, this sire has 18% around 1 turn. So definitely something that for a horse that's trying something new or a maiden, you want to look at those types of pedigree notes. But I think honestly, if it's a horse that's stayed on one surface or is only like stepping up or down in class or is just stretching out an extra furlong or furlong and a half, it doesn't necessarily matter, but it's definitely key with surface switchers and first time starters.
Do you also view, I'm curious everybody, but do you also think the opposite's true? Once a horse has run 2 or 3 times in a sprint, and like you said, if they're doing something the first time, you look at pedigree again, first turf, first route, etc. But once a horse has run 2 routes, once a horse has run 2, is 2 the right number, races on grass, when a horse has ran 2 or 3 times, do you think pedigree is much less important after that?
Yeah, because it's going to end up probably being like an anomaly.
To Jim's point about press your opinion, if you think you know something or you think you've got a good angle and a good price, to make sure you can take advantage of that. One of my favorite stories involves pedigree. The late great John Asher and I had been just battered and beaten through a day of handicapping and the Keeneland Bluegrass Stakes Day. We get to the last race and it's a first level allowance race, but it's on the turf and nothing special in the field. And we see this horse that won a maiden claimer at Turfway Park and was starting for the first time on the turf, but was by Fred Astaire. Great turf influencer. So this horse is 30-1. This horse can win. Why could this horse got a shot in this race? He airs on like 6. $98. And I had enough left to bet 2 to win, and John bet 2 across the board. That's all we had left.
Okay, I think we have time for just a few more questions. Okay, great. So other than past performances, what other products do you use to handicap?
Well, I think Tom mentioned it earlier. It depends on how serious you are. I mean, I use a daily racing forum. Equibase has a wonderful product, Stats Lens, Race Lens. Yeah. And if you're, I think the sheets are good. I mean, the Ragozin sheets, if you can afford that kind of investment, it gives a lot of information in a very concise manner that you can sit there and look at, and you can basically make some really strong opinions.
Now, whatever you use, learn how to use it well.
Correct.
You could switch, but don't give up. And I tell people, because I do a lot of coaching with our Racelens product, and I tell people, take whatever you're doing in your normal handicapping pen, do faster and better, but don't change it. Don't think you're a kid in a candy store and have all these new bells and whistles to go at. First of all, hone what you think is important. You might think pedigree is important. You might look for the false favorite. You might think jockey training is important. Use that in your process. We all have our methodologies. I think, especially the audience we're talking to now has that. So I use Race Lens because it allows me to do that statistical stuff. Formulator does the same things and lets you say, okay, this is a first time starter going a mile and 16th on the grass in Saratoga. How's this sire do with first time starters going 2 turns on the grass? How does Chad Brown do with 2 turns on the grass? How's Chad Brown grew with first time starters going 2 turns on the grass at Saratoga? You can get very narrow, very deep, and occasionally you find a nice nugget that way.
I would add workout reports because when you just see the workouts, there's so much you don't know or can't know. If it's a bullet work, maybe they were pushing the horse to run fast. If it's a slow work, maybe they just wanted him or her to finish up in the last 8 strong. So I really can't glean a lot from that, but I use Bruno DiGiulio's report just because I know him and I have respect for his knowledge and his team's knowledge and what they're doing day in and day out. So if you have somebody whose intelligence you trust, then that can be a valuable addition.
Okay, well, that segues into our last question, which is a 2-part question. How do you use workouts in your handicapping, and do you put much weight on the morning line? So 2-part question.
I'll start on that. I use workouts, especially for first time starters, especially for a horse that's been on a long layoff. You want to see a pattern of a trainer getting that horse back in shape. The worst thing you can see is no workouts for a horse that's been out for 5 months. So yes, you have to use workouts, but like Tom said, you can't just look at this horse got a bullet at Keeneland first of 33 at, ran a 34, 3 furlongs. You've got to see what the trainer was intending. And I think you've got to dig a lot deeper than that. But the morning line odds is something I mentioned before. The morning line odds is just a guesstimate of the people who are doing the morning line odds as to how the gambling will come out. So they are trying to estimate the final morning line. The people that do a really good job, and there are some going to do a wonderful job. He works his tail off, and if you can look at a morning line in New York and poke holes in it, you're doing pretty well, because I think morning lines on Nairo races are extremely good.
I will add that I use workouts in two particular situations. The horse is taking blinkers on or blinkers off. I look at the workouts since the last race, and if the horse has a workout in the top 10%, I circle it, because that tells me a horse, especially a horse that may not be running well, his or her form might turn around, because that's really important. We call it blinkers on workout, fast workout, blinkers off, fast workout. The other is we call workouts per day, and it's not complicated and it's an easy thing to do. But for horses that have been off a long time or first time starters, they need to work about 80% of the furlongs of the day. So just really quick, if you go back 4 workouts and it was 30 days ago, you need to see 25 furlongs in 30 days. Otherwise, in my opinion, the horse isn't fit. And those are two things I use for workouts. For morning lines, I use them to assess vulnerable favorites, I think, like everybody on this panel does.
Absolutely. I would say for me with works, I definitely agree with what Jim says. They're definitely most important when a horse is coming off a layoff and a first time starter. I think for me, when I really look at them for first time starters, I like to see gate works, and I like to see a decent number of gate works, because, you know, first time starters, you never know how they're going to act in the gate. But if I see a decent amount of gate works, it's either that the horse needs more schooling in the gate, or the horse is going to be good out of the gate. So you kind of have to have somebody, like you guys both said, evaluate those works and see, is this horse one that needs more gate schooling, you potentially have a problem getting in and out of the gate, and what the work looks like, how fast it is. So that's really how I use them with first time starters. And horses coming in off a layoff depends on how many works they have, how fast they are, what the intent was behind them, just as these guys said. And for me with the morning lines, I think it's super important what Jim said. This is a reflection of what the morning line odds maker thinks the betting public is going to make the odds at the time the race goes off, not how they think that the race is going to unfold. So it's based on, you know, one eye thinking of what the betting public thinks. So I use it mostly to assess vulnerable favorites and to look for prices that I think are juicy.
Yeah, the only thing I would add is, because it is an assessment of what the morning line maker thinks the public is doing. If you like a horse that's 20 or 30 to 1, don't be scared off if you think you have good reason. Right.
I want to add one more thing about odds. You talked about it, and you talked about 2 horses in a race we all like. Just a quick tool for everybody that's listening out there. You don't have to go and make your own line to check against the tote board. But if you think 3 horses in a race have about the same chance to win, just set odds of, let's say, 3 to 1. If you think 4 horses in a race have a decent chance to win, set odds of 4 to 1. And then you'll have a good idea versus the public. If the public's opinion is much less than yours, and you think, oh, it should be 4 to 1 at 15, then you can do what Tom said, and you can express your opinion.
I think it's a good time to wrap things up. I really appreciate all the insight and valuable information. I am the world's worst handicapper, so I'm going to watch this video a couple of times and try to pick up a few good points. So anyhow, thank you very much, Ellis, Caitlin, Tom, Jim, for your time, your expertise. Really appreciate everything. I really want to thank the audience, the owners that are in the audience. You know, without your investment and your involvement in the game, we just truly wouldn't have a sport. So thank you for being with us today. And we'll be back next month on May the 9th. We're going to skip Kentucky Derby week. We usually do these on the first Tuesday of the month, but we're going to be back on May the 9th talking about developing a business plan for owners. So enjoy the lead up to the Kentucky Derby, and very much enjoy the Kentucky Derby. And we'll see you back here on May the 9th. Thanks, everyone.